Here, I have more too. You know how to order the other side.
Take
them back. If phone's starting to blow up, we're doing our springtime giveaway today and it started at 11 a.m.
So perfect timing.
Yeah, 700 calls in the next couple of hours. Hi, girls, come on in. You guys gotta give me some grades. I've never done this one in person. So we'll see how it goes. I did it. I've done it to most associations I have to.
I have been like, yeah, it's okay, I've been telling
I've called most of them and offered it to them. I offered it to GHR too. Funny enough, GHR is the only one that hasn't taken me up on it.
Drew, I'll say something, we have a board meeting on Thursday.
I've spoken to Lancaster County Association, Lebanon, Huntington.
I think that
I forget which.
they might bring it up on Thursday.
Yeah,
Because they usually wait until,
do it. Do
I
it.
forget that you're on it.
I'm on the board.
Yeah, love that. And
You're
Gary,
more important.
and Gary's on the PAR forms committee
Oh,
for changes from NAR settlement. So, yeah, yeah. All right, are we 11 o'clock? Yeah, we're close. We're gonna get started. I'm gonna turn Alexa down a little
You
bit.
can turn her off.
I like a little bit.
I like how we do for
Right?
Calm down.
I know. She can calm down. She can calm down. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm gonna try to get us out of here before 12 o'clock. But for sure, want to make sure that there is lots of time for questions. I love that so many of you have pen, paper, computer out because I'm going to be giving you some words to use with buyers during this that I've used for my whole career. So for any of you who don't know me, my name is Drue Richmond. I started my career as a buyer's agent 12 years ago. I took a position as a buyer's agent on the Dave Hooke Team before the Dave Hooke Team was the Dave Hooke Team and before I even knew what a buyer's agent was. Didn't know what it was, just thought, you know what? I knew it was gonna be an opportunity for me. So I used this language back when I worked with buyers a lot. And our team uses this language with more than 500 buyers a year. So hope to be able to help you guys with just some simple things that'll help you to earn your fee in this market that we're in. Sound good? Awesome. So we are going to, 4 things we're gonna do today. Step-by-step guide to homebuyer consultations. How many of you hold a homebuyer consultation right now? Okay, about half. How to present your buyer agency and talk about your fee structure and money. We're gonna do all 3 of those things and then I'll leave some time for Q&A. So before we do that, just a quick disclaimer. I'm not only not your attorney, but I'm not an attorney. So just a reminder that I am not an attorney and you should always seek the counsel of anybody in legal to be able to use these words that I'm gonna walk you through. You will also get an opportunity to see some items that we use. You are welcome to use something like this that I'm gonna show you, but do so at your own discretion. Make sense? Okay. All right, we're gonna start with a story. I'm gonna put on my Mrs. Madden kindergarten teacher hat and tell you guys a story this morning. So I want you to try to imagine this with me. So owners of a giant ship found themselves in a pickle one day when their ship engine failed. The ship's owners tried one professional after another, but none of them could figure out how to fix the broken engine. They then brought a guy in who's been fixing ships for a long time. He carried a large bag of tools with him, and when he arrived, he immediately went to work. He inspected the engine very carefully from top to bottom. 2 of the ship's owners were watching this man and hoping he'd know what to do. After looking through things over, the man reached into his bag and pulled out a little hammer. He gently tapped something, and instantly the ship's engine lurched to life. He carefully put his hammer away, and the engine was fixed. A week later, the owners received an invoice from the man for $10,000. What? The owners exclaimed. He hardly did anything. So they asked the man, please send us an itemized invoice. The man sent an invoice that read, tapping engine with hammer, $1. Knowing where to tap, $9,999. Okay, effort is important, but experience and knowing where to direct your hammer makes all the difference in the world. Okay, and so we're talking about what your services are worth as an agent, but specifically a buyer's agent in this training today. So what are our services worth? How much are our services worth? Has anybody in here, done the class, Gary Keller, Jay Papazan, and Jason Abrams, Value Squared? Anybody do that? Brittany and Taylor have done that. Brittany and Taylor, help the rest of the group out. What are the two F words that, they use in that training? Do you remember what type of agent you can be?
Oh. It was fiduciary and.
Functionary.
I didn't even think it.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody spell it for me. Fiduciary, F-I-D?
Yes.
Yeah.
You.
F-U.
Yeah.
How
to spell it. Well.
You know what? We got.
Spelling's not important. Spelling's not important, but what are your services worth? So, I have seen a post floating around Facebook, some of you might have seen it, of this really long list of all the things that a real estate agent does. Anybody see that? It's like a checklist kind of thing, right? That floats around Facebook. And, there are lots of professions that get paid to do checklist kind of items. Most typically, those professions don't earn that much money whenever you're checking off a box, right? It's administrative. Whenever you're doing that, I believe that in real estate, we earn our fee, our higher dollar fee, by being what's called a fiduciary for our customers. So, can you guys think of any type of profession that completes a checklist outside of real estate? Maybe people you work with every day. What's a profession that completes a checklist?
A lender.
A lender? Yeah, could be a lender. What else?
A Starbucks barista.
A barista, right? An open, close checklist. So this is how you make the coffee checklist. What else?
I was thinking banking, like tellers.
Banking, love that. My cleaning lady's at my house today. She's completing a checklist, right? Bathroom, kitchen, sweep, laundry. What else? I got my car inspected. I bet they followed a checklist, right? So there are checklist type of careers, and we call them being a functionary for somebody. Now, let me ask you another question. What do you pay a lawyer for?
Their expertise.
Expertise? What else? What's that? Nothing.
Yeah, Joe.
How do they keep you out of jail? By their expertise, knowledge? What else? Experience?
I don't know if this is the right word. Maybe you can come up with a different one, but like their aggressiveness. You know what I mean? Cause like if you have a soft attorney who's really knowledgeable.
Would you say,
would
would you say willing to fight on your behalf or willing to go to bat for you?
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah.
I pay an attorney, for advice. Anybody else pay an attorney or your tax person for a CPA for advice? Research. Sorry, I have really great handwriting, but I don't know how to spell. Research, somebody said. Okay. What do you pay a financial advisor for?
Like the same thing,
Same thing?
expertise.
Help me protect my investment, right? Protection. Planning. What kind of planning? Financial planning, right? Do you guys want just any financial advisor? Or do you want a financial advisor who has all of those things for you?
Yeah, I prefer to know.
You prefer one of those, right? Do you want just any lawyer?
No.
How come?
So I guess just, you know, I've had a flat rate attorney before
Mhm.
who was cheap. And then years later, when a new problem came up, I found out that a lot of the work that my flat rate cheap attorney did
Mhm.
wasn't helping me at all. So I had to start the process all over.
Okay, so it ended up being more than it was worth, like,
It ended up costing me more money having to redo it with the one with the expertise. I had to pay a premium,
yeah,
but now it was done right. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Not having a good attorney or financial planner can actually cost you more money, time, and stress.
100%. And oftentimes we can see the difference when we've had an experience. So for example, I have worked with an attorney before that is very soft-spoken, is not aggressive, right, in working towards protecting me. And then I've had an attorney who is an absolute bulldog and is going to make sure that my financial investment is protected. Same thing with a financial advisor. I've had a financial advisor that checked a box and I get a call from him once a quarter, hey, just checking in, right? And then I've had a financial advisor who said, tell me what it is that you are investing your money for. Do you want your money now or do you want your money in the future? When do you want it in the future? How adverse to risk are you? And asked me all of these questions and then could make a professional recommendation for me based on those things that was gonna make me more money, right? There is a difference. We're not all created equal. And so the question you first have to ask yourself is what your services are worth. The next one is going to be, how do you communicate your value? So how do you communicate to a buyer what your services are worth? Does that make sense? We're gonna talk about that a little bit more. If you're taking notes, this is the first thing that I would write down. I'd like to say I'm not a tattoo person, but I went to my vacation and got a tattoo. If I did, I would put this on my body. Price is only an issue in the absence of value. In the story I told you in the beginning, why did the ship owners, why were they shocked by that $10,000 price tag? Most likely because the mechanic did not communicate his value. What if that mechanic was able to communicate his expertise and his knowledge and could promise that that boat would be back out to sea by the end of the day? These owners who their livelihood was waiting on it, right? If he could communicate that to them, do you think that would be worth it for them? Probably, right? The same thing is very true for each of you in your real estate businesses. If you have ever not communicated your price to a buyer or a seller, and you have trouble making that communication, it's either number one, you don't know what your services are worth, or number two, you don't know how to communicate your value. You don't know what your services are worth, you don't know how to communicate your value. You're afraid that the buyer or the seller will say it's not worth that. And the reason it might not be worth that is if you don't give the value. Price is only an issue in the absence of value. Okay? Awesome. So we're gonna talk about how to be able to communicate that value. So you could do this a lot of different ways. You could take that Facebook post that is floating around and you could print it out and you could package it really pretty and say, this is the value that I bring to you. And you could hold a consultation with your buyer or seller and be able to communicate your value that way. I think visual is always helpful for a way to be able to communicate your value. We communicate our value using this page. I'll get rid of this stuff. So, some of you raised your hands that you do buyer consultations, others don't. The first step is, you're going to have to hold buyer consultations if you don't do them right now. you are going to have to sit down with a buyer and do a needs analysis and consult with them. And, it is not a change in the state of Pennsylvania to be able to use fire agency, right? And so you'll do this at the same time. We love to be able to use this roadmap. And what this roadmap does is it takes the buyer from their strategy session that they're doing with you right now, this needs analysis, this consultation, the whole way down to closing. And in here, you're going to use each of these steps to communicate your expertise, your knowledge, your experience, your advice, the way that you'll protect them in each of these places, the way that you'll help with their financial investment, okay? But here's the key. As you're doing this, you can't communicate that until you learn about them, okay? So it's been said many times by many people, I don't know who the original person is, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so you will start by sitting down with a buyer and finding out what's most important to them. What are their biggest fears and concerns in buying a home or selling a home? We're talking about buyers. I met with a seller yesterday and they were bouncing their 7-month-old baby girl on their knee the whole time that we were meeting. And I asked that question, what are your biggest fears and concerns about selling their house? And they said, honestly, we have a new baby in our house and people are gonna be coming into our home. Like, that's terrifying to us, right? And I had to be able to know that, to be able to speak to it, right? You have to do the same with buyers. What are you afraid of? What do you know about the home buying process right now? And I love to ask that question because I could spend 3 hours sitting with them, talking about the steps to buy a home and where I'm gonna be able to help them in it. But if I don't know what they already know, I might be redundant, it won't be really helpful for them, right? And so we're gonna spend some time, really most of our time in the consultation here, and then communicating our value. Another thing that you could do, anybody ever tell buyer or seller that the transaction is gonna be great? My job is to make it perfect for you. Anybody ever do that? Why not, Adam?
Don't make promises like that.
Why?
There's always something,
Isn't that your job?
in a way, that's the hope, I suppose.
The biggest thing that you can, you will set yourself up for failure if you tell a buyer or a seller that this transaction is going to be smooth and that it's your job to make it that way, right? Maddie, I'm gonna pick on you. You've had a couple of hard transactions lately, right?
Yeah.
When things go wrong, who is the first person that your buyer or seller blames? Us. Right? If we tell them that it's our job to make sure that nothing goes wrong, which Maddie didn't do, but if you do, then when it goes wrong, who are they going to look at? Instead, I like to tell them that there's a lot of things that are gonna go wrong, probably 88 of them. Right? There are 88 things that could go wrong. I love if I'm sitting with a $250,000 buyer and I get to say, listen, this is very complicated. You are purchasing $250,000 in real estate. And how many parties are involved in this transaction? There's you, there's the seller, there's me, there's another agent. Seller's also buying a home. You're also selling a home. There's an appraiser, there's an inspector. Stuff's gonna go wrong, guys. And we like to make a joke about some of these things, right? Like, I have no control over the sellers in your transaction, right? I could say that, this has happened to me before for sales. No comparable sales are available. I recently sold a home in a rural location that 10 sales happen a year, right? And so the appraisal came in low because there were no comparable sales available, right? So I like to make sure that a buyer knows that there's a lot of things that could go wrong. My job is to help navigate these things that could go wrong with my expertise, my knowledge, my experience, and be able to provide them expert advice on how to navigate through them. Does that make sense? Seems pretty straightforward. Yep. All right, so next steps. Only after you have communicated your value to them through walking them through the home buying process, through all of the things that could go wrong. Because remember, price is only an issue in the absence of value. So we're not going to talk about price, what it costs for my service, until I give them the value. Make sense? Only after I've done that, we're going to lead the buyer to the logical next steps. So the logical next steps are going to be that you're going to acknowledge the consumer notice. You're going to hire me to be your agent through a document that's called a buyer agency. We're going to go over that next. And then we're going to shop for your new home. And we tell buyers that, that we'll either say shop for your new home, we'll say to begin looking at houses and write offers, because that's what they want to do, right? They want to look at houses, they want to write an offer. In order to do that, we have to acknowledge the consumer notice, and you got to hire me to be your agent. Make sense? Okay, lots of note takers in here. And so we have reviewed the consumer notice. This is a consumer notice training, today's buyer agency training. So we've reviewed the consumer notice with the buyer, and now we're going to ask them this question. Do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? Do you know what you are entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? Brittany passed around buyer agencies. Do you guys all have those? They may need one. Yeah, just the first page is all we're talking about today. Are there any extras we need to make a couple copies?
Here's some extra here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? Does anybody know, did anybody know that buyer agency is not a thing in 32 states?
Yeah.
32 states don't have buyer agency. So when you're seeing all these national headlines about, oh my gosh, we have to have a written buyer agreement to be able to show a home. Y'all have had to do that since like 1998 in Pennsylvania, right? It's not a change in the state of Pennsylvania, but it is in 32 other states. So when you see national headlines that the sky is falling, it's because it's new for a lot of people, right? But for us, it's not new. And so what we have to do is to be able to communicate that to the buyer. Do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? You are entitled to your own agent who can help fight for you, not for the seller, who can give you their expertise, knowledge, experience, advice, and work for you in the transaction. That's called being a fiduciary. Okay, we are not just completing checklist items, which is a functionary. We are being a fiduciary for the buyer. And so that phrase is what allows you to introduce the buyer's agency. So two things. Do we have an extra one of those?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. So bring out your buyer agency. Two things. So number one, I'm gonna go away from this. I think I have it open. So you may or may not have known this, but I can give you the website if you need it, but PAR has, for every form that PAR has, you can click on it and click on buyer agency here. Maybe. So PAR will give you a guideline of how to talk to a consumer about every one of your real estate forms. Do you guys know that? Okay. So, downloading it here, now can I see it? Maybe chatting with us, Brittany.
Oh, that's me. I
Oh.
am moderating it. I just threw it in there, like, hey, if anybody has
You're
questions.
amazing. You're amazing. So, so I'm on PAR's website, go to standard forms. I clicked on buyer agency and, there's a button to view guidelines. And it'll show you how to communicate, practice tips and everything on how to communicate every single form every form. So we are incredibly lucky to have so many knowledgeable people around us, but they're not always here, right? And so if you ever have to introduce a new form to a buyer or seller, use this website as a guideline for yourselves. But as I go back to buyer agency, so I've just said to the buyer, I've communicated all my value. My job is to guide you through all of this. I know what's important to you now. There's lots of stuff that's gonna go wrong. It's my job to be able to help you through it. And by the way, do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? You're entitled to your own agent who's gonna help you through that, okay? Now you're gonna bring up your buyer agency, okay? And I'm gonna specifically jump to the fee section. And here's the words that I said. There is no organization that sets our fees. There's no organization that sets our fees. Do we have anybody who is not Keller Williams in the room? Is everybody KW here?
We're all KW.
Great. So there's no organization that sets our fees. The cost for my service is 3%. And a $500 one-time transaction fee known as a broker fee. That's what it costs. I just gave you all my value. Price doesn't matter anymore. That's what the cost of my service is. And here's what I'm gonna say next. It's my practice to accept compensation offered by a listing agent. It's my practice to accept compensation offered by a listing agent. In the event that there's a difference between my fee and what the seller is offering. I'll say this all again, I promise. If you're writing, make this part bold. In the event that there's a difference between my fee and what the seller is offering, it will be one of your closing costs. Anybody know where I got that language?
Mine.
Try again. Good guess. Look at your buyer agency. Look at your buyer agency, guys. It's already in there for you. It is written in number 2, letter A, letter B, and letter B3. Everything I just told you is not rocket science. It's already written for you. You just got to say the words. Right? I feel so blessed to be in a state that it says that already for me. Right? Can you imagine?
It just sounds better when you say it.
No, it doesn't.
I'm so sad.
Do you know why it sounds better? Because I've said it thousands of times. I've practiced it. I believe in my value and that I've communicated it. And so there's not an issue anymore. So I can say it confidently. If you don't know what your value is, or if you don't know how to communicate that to a buyer, you're gonna feel funny saying it, right? Or if you've never practiced it, you're not gonna say it as confidently as I did. So let's go over it again. Okay, so do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? You're entitled to your own agent who can represent your best interest and provide you with the expertise, knowledge, experience, and advice on your specific situation. The great news for you, I'm available for hire, right? I'd love to be able to help you with this. Now let's talk about the cost for my service. There's no organization that sets the fees for my service. The cost of my service is 3% and a $500 transaction fee, a broker fee. And it's my practice to accept any compensation that's offered by a seller. And in the event that there's a difference between my fee and what the seller is offering, it will be one of your closing costs. right? Are there any other people in the transaction who have fees that are in the buyer's closing costs? Who are they? Appraiser, there's an appraisal fee. Title, there's a title fee, right? Attorneys doing work for them, and then it's one of their closing costs. Appraisers doing work, it's a closing cost. Who else? Lender, right? It costs money for that lender to give you a loan, right? Inspector, they're doing an inspection for you. It's one of your closing costs. Sometimes they pay it up front, but it's a closing cost, right? I don't know why we feel funny about telling buyers that one of their closing costs is gonna be the fee for my service, right? It's just one of their closing costs. Now, here's what I like to do. I like to give this as an example on $100,000. And so I tell a buyer that's the one I can do in my head, and it's true. So I will tell them, in the event that you were buying a $100,000 home, my fee would be 3% or $3,000. And let's say the seller is only offering 2%. The difference, $1,000, will be added to your closing costs. And I will include that on any cost estimate that I give you. Make sense? You guys are looking at me like I have 6 heads. Is anybody doing this right now? Does this feel foreign to somebody? What are your fears? What's going through your head? It's all right to be vulnerable here.
And people are gonna come up with objections immediately, try to test you. You know,
It's a great question.
be like,
It's a great
"Oh, I
fear.
think that's a little high. Forget
Great
that,
fear.
it's just silent.
Yeah, that's a good fear to have, for sure. What could you do to find out what those objections might be?
Yeah, you're just ask them straight up.
Yeah, ask them. Ask them for sure, and practice it with somebody, right? Practice it with somebody. What else? What's going through your head? Does this feel easy to somebody? Did I unlock any of these for somebody who's never said these words before?
Do we need to do jumping jacks?
Yeah, what do you need, y'all?
Like 5 jumping jacks, get the blood going.
All right, we are gonna get you going. So actually, real quick, what questions do you have? What questions do you have about saying this? Yeah, go ahead.
What makes you think that buyers aren't aware that they can use their own agent? Why are you saying that? Just out of curiosity.
It's a great question.
That's a great question. I'm not unaware. I don't know if buyers know, right? So I might say, are you aware of what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? If you're entitled to, they might say, yeah, I know I can have my own agent, right? They very well could say that. Most of them say no when you ask that question. Most of them say no. They say, no, I'm not aware of that, right? So, most of them will say no. If you have a different segue into how you talk about your job, you certainly can. It's just the one that I've always used.
That is good.
What other questions do you have?
So if they are working with another broker, then what?
If the buyer's working with another broker, that's a whole nother problem. I'm gonna find that out before I sit down with them, right? So I'm gonna ask some qualifying questions before I even get to the place of sitting down with them. I'm gonna ask questions like, why do you wanna buy a home? And have you talked to a mortgage lender about purchasing a home? And I wouldn't wanna step on anybody's toes. Do you have an agent who's working on your behalf? Right, I'm gonna ask all those questions. I'm gonna make sure that they have a job and that they are not working with another agent and they have a burning desire to buy a house before I sit down with them. It's a great question. All right, we are gonna take 10 minutes and get some blood into this room and we're gonna role play. So I want you to find the person beside you, or at a table next to you, get in groups of 2 to 3. And I want you to use your buyer agency and I want you to assume that you have already done the work of communicating your value to the buyer. We're gonna imagine that you've already done this and that you have already, you've done all of that. And now you are gonna walk them through the next steps and page 1 of the buyer agency. Sound good? All right, I'm gonna get Alexa, flowing and we're gonna take 10 minutes and do a role play.
Well, I guess. I'm good. It's all you. Okay. Yeah, I've done it. Things up fire age. Things up fire age. So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it.
And this section. So my for service. And that's how that I started. It just. I don't actually, do you do mine? Okay.
I'll have to. Sometimes fairly new.
Yeah, I do it in the house, when it's like a biased guy, and then I bring this out. And it's not like your house. Because if a seller, I think like 300%. I'm just gonna. You? Yeah, I just feel like.
You can.
I don't know if she's not gonna leave at the time, but she, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, saying it's good.
If you need any help on your guided role play, I want you to actually practice saying the words. So one of you should be the buyer, one of you should be the agent, and I want you to practice saying the words and then switch. Okay?
All right. Where was I? So cost for my service, burger fee 500. It is my practice, so. To use my practice. Except.
Well, you're in time. So right now, I'll be all.
Right, so who wants to do that?
Short sweet.
I'll be the buyer.
It's actually an assessor fee.
Man, I'm so sad. Like, this is why I do this thing. I don't. And I'm just.
My practice. On salary.
Right now, that have been.
Will be.
I saw it on there, just like. Not anything. That's how my. I go with you. So yeah, so at the top here, this is just the basic info. I already. Section 1 is where it starts to get important, talks about our term. So for our term, which is 6 months, that's usually a preference. That's what we have. That's why it's stated right there. That's one. Section 2, it talks about my fee. My fee is over $500.
And.
And I was thinking of say 3% or 3,000. Yeah. Whichever. Yeah, I think so. I was thought. Yeah, so my fee is 3% or $3,000 because it's greater. So I was paying pretty much. Yeah.
Anybody stuck? Anybody need help?
But in our. Now, if we're doing that, like, I don't think for that, like, you would cover it all. That would be.
Alright, so you guys know you're.
Just like, where would I see that? Or is it out?
Yeah. What's the other thing you talked to?
Alright, you're in charge of having your own agent, it's gonna
That you would be.
yeah, look after you and
Guys, you know, always have that.
do everything for you, so it's not like.
Yeah. I will.
Always do.
Conflict.
I think.
If you're doing this, you're adding out loud, make sure you have a conversation with your name and then their initials or.
Yeah.
Actually, you guys didn't go to the.
All right.
First step. Every transition. No, but, so, yeah, now when I know, you know, things like these. Organization that says these. Sometimes 695.
You're in agreement with me. Sometimes when we get out here, you want to do that now?
Oh, right, no, they will. No, they will. And it's not. Yeah, so, that's my practice too, so you can get a position offered by, the other agent. In the event there is a difference, this will be one.
Any questions? Yeah, that's like, that's why. That's why.
Got me like, what do you got there?
And then I like. And then everything I just said. I don't really.
I think what I would say is, yeah, well, this is always the lead for when I do right, but I guess depending on who you are, I'd be willing to negotiate if you would like, depending on who you are.
You want less.
I don't want that. Yeah.
That's because they're not prior.
Just about, yeah, just about. People want.
You get paid for, you know, what to do.
I think like going into.
So when I was a teacher.
Like with your technical life. you're ready to go by
Yeah, like I buy things off.
If you start discounting, it's gonna be, you're just gonna get in that rut, taking less.
You're gonna keep doing it, yeah.
Yeah, I have a deal right now, I have a deal right now that I discounted by 1%. Yeah, just keep it, yeah, $50. And it was like, it was make or break it, like, my guy was ready to throw away $10,000 over, like, this was starting to hack, and then like, well. If I'm like. Yeah, yeah.
I thought, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's what made me show.
I really need to practice. It's fun to find it. Yeah. I walked around.
I know that you got one that I actually. What if they like talk about it?
Yeah.
For sale by owner. You know that company that like,
Yeah.
it's like a flat $1,000.
Yeah.
How was that? It's awful if you've never role played. Yeah, a little awful. Maddie's smiling.
That's okay, I like it.
Where were the words? Where did they flow for you? What felt hard? What do you got? Somebody give me some feedback.
I think it was pretty good. I think the words that you use make it kind of, I mean, there's enough information, but it's simple enough that like you can kind of relay it in an effective manner, I would think.
Yeah. What do you got?
So we ran into like, I just wouldn't know what to say, so what if somebody's like, no, I'm not gonna give you the extra 0.5% at closing cost?
Then that you're entering a negotiation for your fee. So then you're trying to decide if you're going to go into a relationship with this person,
Does
right?
that happen often?
No. More often than not, they may not sign with you on the spot, right? But you know, just if you think about anything that you pay for, right? Like, there's not often an open negotiation for what your fee is, right? But they may decide not to move forward. Please know that I gave you guys the absolute notes version of all of this, like your buyer consultation should uncover most of their objections up front, right? Before we even get to this page, and by the time that we get here, they should be fully bought in, like, I need to buy a house, and like Maddie is gonna be the person that gets me what I want, right? So I did give you the Cliffs Notes version before you do that. What other questions or what other ahas did you have? Nothing?
I'll just add like that fear of handling those objections, or like if they say, well, I don't wanna pay the other 0.5%. That diminishes the more you practice and do the scripts and role play, because you become so confident with what you're saying and the service that you provide. And that self-confidence knows that you know what you're worth. And that when you're that confident in your consultations, they're gonna push back on you less, right? Because now you're coming off like this very experienced buyer's agent. And they will gravitate towards that. So practice makes perfect. So these scripts and role plays, like you all can team up and take 15 minutes every morning before you leave Jen. And you can work together and role play it out, so that way you're more confident when you go into the real life situation with a client.
Yeah, and one of the things that Brittany and I Adam and I talked about was that question that I say, do you know what you're entitled to in the state of Pennsylvania? Sometimes I say that when I'm on the phone with a buyer. And that is the language that I begin to use to set the buyer consultation with them. Okay, so I'll do that, and I have 3 options for a buyer consultation. Best case scenario is I get them into the office for the buyer consultation before we see a house. Second best is gonna be over Zoom. And your Brittany Giles is an absolute expert in doing a buyer consultation over Zoom, going over all of these documents, sending them to them and getting them signed while you're on Zoom. So second best is over Zoom. And then third, if I'm in a showing, that kitchen is my office for the day. The hood of my car is my office for the day. And I'll always tell the buyer that we're doing that at the time. And then what I'll do is when we get to the consultation section, I'll say, do you remember what I told you you're entitled to your own agent in the state of Pennsylvania? And then that's where we'll go into it. Does that make sense? What do you got, Kayla?
Just to add a couple things and speak to that for you, and to piggyback on what Drue and Brittany are saying. So practicing this so it comes across like you're not reading it right, and that happens over time. And then making sure that you're not adding in words, and not to pick on anybody in our group, but we're just getting used to saying this. Mark was very blunt. But like a just so you know, or I also want to tell you, or adding in those little things when you're uncomfortable because you can't find your words because you're unsure of yourself, that breaks down confidence for somebody who's listening to you versus just saying that. So practicing this over and over again will help. But what also Drew alluded to in like, what are you afraid of? So when you sit down with someone to go through a consultation, you start asking questions, like, tell me about what you're looking for, like, why are you looking for that? Right, and it's not just like a 3-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms, right? It's, why is that important to you? How are you going to use that home? Like the discovery questions, and that's where people really feel heard and feel like you value them. So when you get to the point of going over this, they already have a connection with you because you've asked them questions that are important to them. But then if they do have an objection, you have something to fall back on, where you say, oh, if you're not ready to move forward, or if this doesn't seem right, I must have missed something, right? We went over that you need to sell your home because of X reason, you need to be in by this reason, you need all of these things that are all lined up, that says we need to start looking now. And if you're not ready to move forward, I must have missed something. What did I miss? Because you've earned the right to ask that question, right? And you get that through discovery, which we'll go over a ton in CC, but that's what you use for objections, are things that you've discovered along the way because you've taken time to get to know the person's side.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. I want to end, on 2 things. First, everybody open up your calculator on your phone for me. We're gonna do a little bit of math together. So, again, we're all Keller Williams, so we can talk about fees in here. What do you see more commonly offered to buyer's agents on the MLS right now? Do you see, 3%, 2.5%, 2.5 is what you're used to seeing, right? And who knows what that might go to in July when, we may start to get, you know, some type of permission to the seller. So 0.5%, right? Let's do an average sale price of 300,000. So type 300,000 into your phones right now. And now we're gonna take that times 0.5%, 0.005. Okay, Maddie, how many homes do you wanna sell to a buyer this year? 12. 12? Take that number times 12. What could you do with an additional $18,000? A lot. What would you do with it?
Buy a new car.
Buy a new car. You could get a whole car for that, right? If you could master being able how to communicate your fee, you could buy yourself a damn car. Right? If, who knows, I am not a doomsayer, but there are a lot of uneducated agents in our marketplace. And if we get to a place where buyer agency offered is 0, and you don't know how to communicate this, how much are you gonna earn on a transaction? $0. You're all gonna start working for free. If you can communicate this, at the very least, you can buy yourself a car. Right? So, I think it's incredibly powerful what you can do with learning how to do it. If any of you didn't have the courage to ask a question or want to talk about this more in depth, want to do it even more, feel free to book a strategy session with me. I do them totally for free, usually over Zoom, sometimes in the Carlisle office, but I'd love to be able to help you in any way. Working through it. Thanks so much. Mike, what do you got?
My biggest fear is losing out on a client and communicating my value to somebody else that's going to do it cheaper.
Your biggest fear is losing out on a client because of what your fee is.
Yeah.
And somebody else is gonna do it cheaper. Yeah. You know, I'm not a therapist, but if I were, and if I worked through it, I would have to say that that's a real possibility that you'll have to learn how to accept if you want to do what we're talking about. Right? Because there's always gonna be somebody who's gonna do it cheaper than you, right?
And I think part of it goes into like being able to understand your client, read into the conversation, how it's going.
All of
And
that.
see if they're,
And again, we went over Cliff's Notes, like level 1, how to read the words on the first page of the buyer agency. Like level 3 of this training is learning how to uncover objections and and be able to speak to them, right? So one of the things that if I got to the end of this and a buyer wasn't willing to, I would just say, are there any reasons why we wouldn't move forward today? Are there any reasons we wouldn't move forward today? And if they say it's your fee, I will say to somebody that I believe in, that I could help, I don't want to let my fee stand in the way of you getting into the house of your dream and you having somebody who is going to give you expert advice, knowledge, right? And so I might come up with a plan with that person to be able to still earn the fee that I'm comfortable with, and get them their house. Right, so, you know, are there any reasons we wouldn't move forward in this? And if it is fee, I won't let my fee stand in the way of that being able to happen. It's a good question. It's a good question. Sometimes, and thanks for sharing that vulnerably. I've heard people say, well, I'm not an expert. Right? I haven't sold a house before, right? Look around, there are experts all around you. There are people all around you to be able to help you. That's just a mindset block to work through, that you have the resources to be able to work through that, for sure. Any other thoughts, questions? See me offline if you do. If not, you got Brittany at 12:30 teaching you
8 steps to get more business this year. So it's taking Dave Hooke's 36 touch plan, but breaking it down. And I got some really cool tools to show you, so that way a lot of it's done for you. And it's not just command.
Awesome.
So.
Thanks so much, guys.
Oh, that's like it's for a show at 30. You know,
Great start.